In 2002, he moved to Utah for a PhD. And his draw to Utah was in large part because we have one of the world's most renowned whale experts, Professor Vicki Roundtree, in our School of Biological Sciences. Luciano completed his PhD with a highly informative and novel study of the diet and migration of southern right whales. And also while in Utah, he worked with Dr. Jim Elringer and specialized in an analytic technique called stable isotope analysis, which has allowed him to contribute to research in many different fields. So in addition to animal ecology, he's also contributed to studies on human physiology and diet, forensics, you can imagine CIS, Argentina style, food traceability, and bioarchaeology, both here in the US and in Argentina. He now lives again in Argentina and is a CONICET researcher in the coastal city of Cauquén, where you can find him walking his dogs as well as working and surfing. And I'm imagining, Luciano, that you're really enjoying the summer because we're in the midst of our cold winter here. As the students who have participated in the Ecology and Legacy Argentina minor over the years will attest, we are super fortunate to have Luciano as an adjunct faculty in the Honors College. And so with that, Luciano, thank you for agreeing to Zoom in today and talk with us about Patagonian right whales, from whaling and near extinction to ecotourism and new global threats. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And then finally, at the end of Luciano's talk or during his talk, if you have any questions, you feel free to put those in the Q&A and we will address those at the end of his talk. Thanks, Luciano.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Sylvia, for the invitation, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to talk to you about something that I love, which are whales, something that has changed my life, which is working with people at the Instituto de Conservación de Ballenas, Whale Conservation Institute would be the translation. I'm dealing with some things here in my screen. That's maybe why I'm a bit distracted, but give me just 1 sec. There we go. I just couldn't move one little square of the video there. So I'm extremely happy to talk to you about what we have learned over 5 decades, 50 years of studies of southern right whales in Argentina. So let me start by showing you a picture of the subject of study. This is a beautiful mother and calf pair, which is what we normally see at Peninsula Valdez in Argentina. And the center of our talk today is going to be around these animals, healthy females that give birth of some very cute babies and spend a few months at Peninsula Valdez. And we do research on them, and we have learned a great deal of their biology and their conservation and their threats over the last 50 years. But before we start talking about southern right whales, let me explain a few things about these animals. They are whales, of course. They're baleen whales or mysticetes. Baleen whales are the largest animals on Earth. The main characteristic is that the absence of teeth and the presence of baleen plates. Of course, there are many other characteristics, but the true whales or the baleen whales all have in common that they don't have teeth and they have baleen plates. A baleen or a baleen plate is a structure that is located in the mouth of these animals. It allows them to filter their food and it's made out of keratin. It looks like hair. If you've never seen one live, I have one here. I don't know if the video is going to show it, but here, this is a baleen plate. It's kind of tall. This goes in the mouth of the animal. It's bending, but it's pretty hard. It's made out of keratin, like I said. And these hairs that you see in the picture, they form nets, or they're kind of nets, and that's what allows them to filter their food. Let's see if I could show that. This is a picture of a right whale with their mouth open. And as you can see on that shiny side, many vertical lines. Those vertical lines are actually the edge of the baleen plates that these animals have in their mouth. The whale has the mouth open and it swims on the surface of the water and swallows the water and all the food that it can find in there. So of course there are many type of many species of baleen whales, around 16, 17, if we count the new one that was supposedly discovered in Mexico. The most famous probably the humpback whales. There are some small ones like the minke whales, the largest animals to have ever lived, the blue whales, sei whales. Well, there are many species of baleen whales, but the focus of our talk and the focus of our research are the southern right whales, Eubalina australis. There are 3 species of right whales. The North Atlantic right whales, which is on the map here in that blue color, that's their distribution or their past distribution in this case. The North Pacific right whale, which is in the red color in the North Pacific. And the Southern right whale, which has a distribution all around the Southern Hemisphere, with populations that we know of located on the coast of South America, Southern Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. So right whale populations were driven to near extinction. Right whales in general, no? The 3 species were driven to near extinction by commercial whaling activities. They're called right whales because they were the right whales to kill. They're slow swimmers. They're usually found very close to shore. I'm going to show you some pictures now, which is something that for us is very good when we want to do research, but for them was really bad during the whaling years. These animals float when they're dead. This is because they have a very thick layer of blubber or fat under their skin that gives them positive buoyancy. That thick layer of blubber also produces abundant whale oil, and that was actually what the whalers were mainly after when they were hunting these animals. So the right whales, in particular the North Atlantic right whales, started being hunted in the 11th century by the Basque whalers in Europe. The peak of hunting occurred during the 1700s. By 1930s, there was almost a complete extinction of these species, particularly the North Atlantic and the North Pacific. And in 1937, the hunting of right whales was banned, and the whalers switched to other species. And you can actually see in the history records how the other species started being hunted that previously were not. So in 1946, the International Whaling Commission was created, and their objective was to provide for the proper conservation of whale stocks and allow that the possible orderly development of the whaling industry. So basically, the International Whaling Commission, which is an international treaty, was created to allow the populations of whales to recover, but to continue hunting them in the future. In 1982, the International Whaling Commission adopted a moratorium or a stop on all commercial whaling. So basically, no whales could be killed without commercial purpose behind it. Of course, there are exceptions like scientific permits and indigenous hunting. But nowadays, the International Whaling Commission has switched its stance on whales, and there is actually more of a protection and conservation objective in mind. But going back to the early hunting or the early whaling activities, this is a map that was published some years ago by Townsend, which shows the location of whaling ships by one fleet. Remember that there were several other ones, but this is one fleet, probably the most important during those years, which was the Yankee fleet. These maps record the location of individual ships the day that one or more whales were hunted during the 1760s and 1920s, so many years. But actually, you could see here that during those years, there are basically no dots on the North Atlantic Ocean. That's because there were other whaling companies working there, but basically because the fleets moved to other areas because the North Atlantic right whale has been pretty much gone, at least for commercial purposes. If we zoom in the area that we're going to be talking about later, which is the South Atlantic Ocean, particularly the western part of the South Atlantic Ocean, the coast of South America, you could see that there were a lot of points located very close to the coastline, but also in the middle of the Atlantic, right? So remember, each point is the place. This map has been exaggerated. Points have been moved around a little bit to show that there were several points in the same location. But what it shows here is that there was a lot of whaling activity going on for southern right whales in the Southern Ocean. So it is estimated that between 55,000 to 70,000 southern right whales existed prior to the whaling activity. Some estimates even talk about 100,000 southern right whales in the Southern Hemisphere. After decades of protections, remember these animals were protected in the 30s. After decades of protection, we estimate that now there are between 15,000 and 20,000 individuals in the entire Southern Hemisphere. These animals are protected by different laws, some international treaties like the International Whaling Commissions of the CITES Treaty, but also by some local laws or some nation-wide laws in different countries. But killing or hunting right whales did not stop when the hunting was banned in the 30s. There was whaling for southern right whales and other protected species illegally after that. And this is a map that shows the location of hunting or whaling in November and December of 1961. So just a couple of months. And during those 2 months, there was a hunting of around 1,300 right whales illegally taken by Soviets or by actually Soviet ships or whaling ships right offshore of Argentina. So basically of the population that we work on, the population that visits Peninsula Valdez, which I'm going to show you later in a map exactly where it is. So they were hunting animals illegally in all around the globe. This is just a part of the area that we are interested in. In 1960, so not too long ago, they hunted all type of animals, but all the females that were pregnant had fetuses between 0.7 and 2.2 meters. So very small animals, or actually some that were pretty much ready to give birth at Peninsula Valdez. So these animals were hunted to near extinction for many years. Actually, even in the 60s, they were still hunted. In the 60s, it was a time that lots of naturalists visit Argentina, visit Patagonia. And it's actually a time of, I'm not a conservation historian or a historian of the conservation movement, but the 60s was a special time. Jane Goodall in Africa, and Diane Fawcett also with the gorillas. Lots of different biologists went around and started doing research on animals in a very different way than before, with this new concept that the animals, we don't need to kill or trap or bring the animals to the lab. We could actually study them in the wild. So we didn't know much about what right whales were doing. We didn't know much about their biology. And in 1970s, Dr. Roger Payne came to Peninsula Valdez, which is located in the north part of Patagonia, and you can see there in the map in that red square. And he was completely surprised by few things of the Peninsula Valdez. But the main thing that he was surprised was how close the animals were to shore, how many animals there were, and how easy it could be to study there, to develop and apply non-lethal methods of study. And actually, Argentina and Peninsula Valdez is still the center in which many non-lethal study methods are developed and applied for whales, to study whales. So, like I said, Peninsula Valdez is particular in a few ways. This is a picture and you can see one of the many bays and high cliffs. And if you look in the water, you could see some black spots. Those are whales, mother and calf pairs probably. And you can see how close they are and how easy it could be to study them. You could approach them by boat. You could approach them, you could actually look at from the cliffs. There are many ways, and it's a unique area to study animals. This is a picture of one of our colleagues, Mariano Cironi, doing behavioral observations from the cliff without bothering the animals, right? You don't need to get in the water to study them because the place allows you to do that. This is actually one old photo from Roger Payne, and you can actually see him looking right down on a pair of mother and a calf pair right underneath the cliff, and you can study their behavior. But one of the things that Roger discovered in 1970 is that each animal has white markings on their head, which are called callosities, and that each individual animal has a callosity pattern that is unique, and it doesn't change over time. So that makes this pattern similar to a fingerprint. So if you take a photograph of the animal and you create a database or a catalog of these white markings, of these callosity markings, you could actually get a catalog of fingerprints of animals and start identifying them and following them through time. This discovery became the backbone of what is now the Right Whale Research Program that Sylvia mentioned at the beginning, that and Professor Vicky Roundtree there at the University of Utah is the director. And this is a picture of one of the callosities. It's a close-up of one of the callosities. The callosities, these white markings, are not white because the skin is white. It's because it's covered by thousands and thousands of tiny crustaceans called cyanids. But when we look at it from the air, what we see are white spots, and those white spots early on were photographed and they were put into real paper or slides catalogs that Vicky used to arrange them by the pattern, by their shape, and start making matches to see if an animal was seen early in the season or late in the season, if it was seen throughout many years, and if the animal was alone, if there was a female and it had a calf. So slowly it started building information. This is in the 70s, started building information on the biology of these animals, how long took between giving birth and things like that. This is a picture that you could see. Is actually, you could see the animal, you could see the shadow of the airplane. So every year we fly around Peninsula Valdez and we take aerial photographs of the animals to create this photo ID, or this photo ID catalog. Here is a picture of two animals that you can actually see right away how different the two callosity patterns are. So these animals could be identified later on based on those white markings. Nowadays, the catalog is digital. Still, Vicky is still the person that curates this catalog and analyzes every year aerial survey with thousands and thousands of photographs nowadays, because it's all digital and the photographer takes so many photos. But that has allowed the research team to have a catalog with more than 3,000 identified whales and it could be much larger now. I don't have the latest numbers, sorry, Vicky. But it's a tremendous catalog. It's a study. The photo ID has been done since 1971 continuously. Unfortunately, last year, because of COVID-19 restrictions, it was the first year that we could not do an aerial survey. It still is the longest study in the world following a population of, continuously following a population of whales. And that makes us very, very proud. So Peninsula Valdez, located in the northern coast of Patagonia, on the coast of northern Patagonia and Chubut province, is a nursery area. It has a set of characteristics that whales prefer when they give birth and when they are nursing their young for the first few months. The main characteristic that we could see right away is that they tend to stay very close to shore, very close to shallow waters. That gives them protection from predators. The only predator that visits the area, predators for young babies from young cats, are orcas or killer whales. So when an animal is very close to shore, like in this other picture taken from a boat, you can see how close they are to the coastline. Each of those white things floating there is a whale. Sometimes it's hard to point a picture, how they look, because they are very strange looking creatures. When a whale is very close to shore in shallow waters, basically what you get is protection from a predator that will come from the ocean. You have land from one side, and then you have land underneath you, because the bottom of the ocean is very close, and then you only have one side that you have to be aware of, and that an animal could approach to, a predator could approach it. So we think that that's for protection. Another characteristic that these bays have is that they could transmit, these calm waters, they could transmit sound very easily and kind of funnel information from one place to another. So these animals are large. Adults are between 12 to 16 meters, or you could think about yards. Females tend to be larger, rounder, heavier, between 30 to 50 tons. So they're pretty large animals. Their tail, the width of their tail, which you can see in actually that photo of an adult female, could actually be around 5 meters, which is pretty large. The calves are born between 4 and 6 meters. That's a big baby, and weigh around 2 to 3 tons at birth. But the incredible thing about these animals is that they grow very rapidly, at least the first few weeks, growing more than an inch per day. And you'll see that in the next slide, that's where all that energy comes from. So these animals at Peninsula Valdez are giving birth and nursing, but they're also mating. They form mating groups of one female and usually several males. The females give birth for the first time at 9 years of age, on average. Of course, there is a range. The gestation period is 12 months, a year of gestation. The weaning period is, the weaning age is 12 months, so they are one year lactating. And most births occur between July and September. So winter to early spring is where most births occur at Peninsula Valdez. So they reproduce very slow. Remember that I said they give birth when they are 9 years of age. So they have to wait 9 years until they can give birth. And like I said, there is a year of gestation, a year of lactation, and they need a year to recover from the gestation and lactation. And this is because it's very expensive to have these babies that grow a lot. And so that makes these animals to have a baby every 3 years on average. They could be longer calving intervals, but the average is usually 3 years. One interesting thing and one important thing to know is that when they are at Peninsula Valdez and the babies are lactating or nursing, the mothers are fasting. They're not eating. So all the energy to grow fast, this more than an inch per day, comes from the mother's reserves, from their blubber, their fat, and their muscles. So the mother, the milk and the calf survival, the milk production and the calf survival depends on the mother reserve. So if the mother did not have a year to recover, she could not be ready to gestate and then lactate and spend a few months, up to 4 months sometimes, fasting and giving all her energy to their babies. Their baby. They have one baby a year. So, but the population is growing. Since the 1970 until the year 2000 or so, the population was growing at a 7% per year. That for these type of animals, for their reproductive cycle, is a very high rate. So the population is growing, is recovering fast. We have detected changes in habitat use over time. In the 70s and early 80s, the whales were normally concentrated on the outer coast of Peninsula Valdez, in the area known as Punta Norte and Caleta Valdez. There were not many whales inside the Peninsula Valdez in Golfo San Jose or Golfo Nuevo. But currently, you don't find animals on the outer coast. You do find them in Golfo San Jose and Golfo Nuevo in high concentrations or in high numbers. Why they left the outer coast or why they stopped using it, it's a mystery. There are several hypotheses there. For example, the presence of orcas or killer whales on that area, but nothing has been proven yet on this change on the distribution. The seasonality or the presence of these animals at Peninsula Valdez has high peaks in August, September, October, and nowadays even in November. Another important aspect of knowing animals and identifying animals based on photographs is that you could compare catalogs with other researchers in Argentina and in other countries and see if the animals are visiting, are migrating between these or among these sites. And we do know that right whales have maternally directed site fidelity. Basically, the animals return always or most of the time to the place where they were born to give birth to their new offspring. But some animals, not a lot, but some animals have been photographed giving birth in Argentina and giving birth in Brazil, and even have been photographed in Uruguay, but not with babies. One of the examples is Trough. Trough is a fantastic animal. She's a big traveler. She has been photographed in Brazil with a calf in 1988 and then alone in 1994. But previously, she was photographed in Argentina in 1970, 1973, and 1979, and then in 1981 and in 2004, which was the last time, and I was lucky to see her live. So animals like Trough are the ones that we that connects the different populations in the South American coast. We know that there are different nursery areas, southern Brazil and Argentina, but we also know that there is exchange of animals or females at least between those two areas. But when they leave Peninsula Valdez, where do they go? And what do they eat? I mean, after 4 months of fasting, they need to eat. So they leave Peninsula Valdez and they go to eat something. One of the main ideas, or one of the main, sorry, not ideas, the main places that we know these animals go is the South Georgia Island. Here in this map, you can actually see the arrows pointing towards a small black bean over there. that's the location of the South Georgia Island. South Georgia Island was one of the main whaling places prior to the prohibition of whaling. Still is one of the main places to see right whales and other species in polar areas or in polar regions. And it is a place in which whales from Peninsula Valdez have been photographed, so there is a direct link and connection, and also whales from South Africa have been detected using that area. So one of the main ideas that we have is that whales from different nursery areas could mix in their feeding areas, but aside from South Georgia and the north of the Peninsula Antarctica, we really don't know which ones are the feeding areas that are actually currently used nowadays. I have my own ideas, but nothing that we could prove yet. But we have done different studies trying to find out where these animals are eating and what they are eating. And one of the techniques that we have used is called stable isotope analysis. I'm not gonna go into details of any of this. It's a little bit technical. It could be an entire lecture on this. But basically, we measure different forms of the different forms of the chemical elements on tissues, for example, whale skin, baleen plates, or zooplankton. And if the isotope ratios or the combination of the different elements are the same between the tissues and the zooplankton from different areas, we have a match, and we say that the animal was eating on that particular feeding area, or that particular area, and that particular type of food. Based on that, which I explained very broadly, we estimate that the Patagonian right whales might use at least 3 different feeding areas or feeding sources. And one is definitely the polar regions, right? But around Antarctica. That involves the South Georgia Islands, of course. The other area could be the coast of, not the coast, but offshore Argentina and Uruguay, which we know is very productive, and we know that the whaling activity or the whaling ships were located when they were hunting animals. And there is a third area that could be a different area, could be a mix of these two. This is up to for discussion. But one of the interesting things that we discovered by analyzing stable isotopes and combining it with genetic studies is that maternal lineages or matrilines, basically all animals descended from the same female, tend to have similar stable isotope values, basically tend to eat in the same general areas. And that is different among maternal lineages. And that idea, and this is over many generations, and that idea, that concept, is consistent with animals having a maternally directed site fidelity to feeding grounds. Basically, indirectly, we are suggesting that these animals return always to the same feeding area, the area that, or the location of the area they probably learned it during their first migratory trip after they left Peninsula Valdez with their mother. And they continue going to the same trip, to the same area, and that was passed on from generation to generation. Recently, starting in 2014, although I say recently, and that is 7 years ago already, but it's a research project that continue, and the last set of the last work was done in 2019. A consortium of research organizations started satellite tracking animals. Basically, they tagged different animals at Peninsula Valdez with a satellite instrument, or an instrument with a satellite reception. And basically, you could follow the animals around for a few months. We haven't been able to have a complete year yet, because it's very difficult. But at least we got a sense of what some animals do, depending if they are adults, if they're juveniles, if they are mothers. And in this plot, you have the migratory patterns of five different animals once they left the peninsula. And it's actually very interesting to see how some of the animals tend to stay around what we call the Patagonian shelf, or the shelf break, which are the orange and yellow colors, while some other ones directly go much, much farther and go to the Islas Georgia del Sur of the South Georgia Island and tend to feed on that area. This is very, very interesting data. It's very cool, and it matches some of the interpretations that we have from the isotope work. So I said that between 1971 and the year 2000, the population growth rate was around 7% per year, which was high, and it was good. But in recent years, the population, the growth rate has lowered. And that doesn't mean that the population is not growing. It means that it's growing slower than before. What happened in these last 2 decades? Which are the problems? Are they suffering from something? Is this normal? It could be just a normal cycle of the population, or there could be problems. We have detected some problems, and we of course haven't proven why that rate is slowing down, but we have some ideas. And the first idea that I want to show you is that we know that the reproductive success of any animal is linked to nutritional stress. But you might think, how is a population that has very low numbers in comparison to previous or before the whaling, how is that a species or a population that has very low numbers of animals could be suffering nutritional stress? There should be plenty of food for everybody because there are few ways eating. Well, this paper was published some years ago now. There is not the year is not there, but I think it was 2001. Vicky was one of the researchers, and this is all based on data gathered from photo ID of these animals, basically from seeing the animals, from photographing the animals, from seeing when they had a calf, when they should have a calf and didn't. So basically what they saw in this paper is that years in which waters around the South Georgia Island, the main feeding ground, was cold, there was a high krill abundance, and following that, there was a high reproduction of right whales. On the contrary, years with warmer waters, this is the product of the El Niño Southern Oscillation, is a climate anomaly that warms the water around Antarctica. But in years in which there was warmer water, there was lower krill abundance, and the consequence was lower reproduction for right whales. Right? So what we're seeing here is just what happened during normal climate oscillations, but this could be thought as what's happening with global change or climate change. The waters are getting warmer around Antarctica, the krill abundance is getting lower, and we might be having a lower reproduction, and that is why the growth rate of the population has slowed down or has decreased. It's one of the ideas. Something to support that something is going on with the foraging strategies of these animals, with the food of these animals, is something that we found and we published last year with colleagues from South Africa. These are actually from the South African right whales, not the Argentinian Patagonian right whales. What we did was we measured stable isotope values on skin samples from the 90s, 1995, 96, 97, and compare those isotope ratios with more recent samples, 2016 and 2019 particularly. And what we saw was a dramatic change on the isotope ratios of the animals sampled in the two different decades. That means directly that there is a change on the foraging strategy, there is a change on the food that the animals were eating from the 90s to the more recent years. In particular, the trend that of the values suggest that the animals in recent years are not eating in the most southern food feeding grounds, basically closer to Antarctica, and they are preferring or being forced to feed on prey on lower latitudes. What's interesting is that this time period, the 90s, the change from the 90s to the 2000s coincides with a reduction in the number of whales that are being sighted in South Africa, and also a reduction in the calving success of that particular population. But that is talking about the reproductive success. We could also look at reduction in the growth rate based on the mortality of these animals, because if you get a lot of high mortality of young animals, you will get later less reproductive animals and your growth rate could be reduced. There has been recent events of high mortality at Peninsula Valdez. This is an older graph that goes just to 2014. There are more recent data, but the interesting thing is that the number of dead animals increased dramatically or sharply in the 2000s, particularly after 2003, which was also the year that a stranding network was set up in the peninsula to address these high mortality events in the area. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how to take it, we have not detected a dominant or unique cause of death after the necropsies were conducted. So all the animals that strand and they are reported, the team conducts a necropsy. Samples are being sent to different labs, but we have not detected a dominant cause of death that could explain these high mortality events. So basically, there is a collection of different causes of death of these animals. There have been some viruses and some bacteria, some other ones we don't know, but most of the deaths are calves, basically babies that just were born that particular year, and could be also storms or different issues that are causing the death of these animals. One thing that is actually unique to this particular population and has been put forward as explaining causes of death is the interaction that these animals have with gulls or seagulls. In this population, seagulls have learned to feed off the back of the living whales. Basically, when the animals surface, there is a gull that will fly and will attack and peck on the back of the animals and produce wounds. It will actually open the skin and try to reach the blubber layer. And this is a huge problem. This was detected in the early 80s, if I'm not mistaken, with very few animals being attacked. But nowadays, if you go to Peninsula Valdez, you will see pretty much every single whale with white spots on their back, which are open wounds produced by seagulls. What's the problem with this? First of all, these are open wounds that could get infected. Gulls could transmit diseases like any other vector in nature, but also the gulls are changing the behavior of the whales. The whales should be resting because the mothers are not eating, they're fasting, they're conserving energy. The only thing that the animals should be doing is nursing their offspring. But nowadays, whales spend a lot of energy trying to escape from the gulls. So they are actively swimming a lot, they're spending much more time underwater. And this has physiological effects on their on the whales. Another issue that we have detected, and is something that unfortunately is becoming more and more common in different species around the world, is the presence of anthropogenic debris, particularly plastic, in the stomach or the digestive tract of this animal. This was a paper published by Vicky, Mariano, and other colleagues last year that shows the first case of marine debris, plastic and others, found in the stomach content of a dead whale from Peninsula Valdez a few years ago. And this is a huge problem in the world, and is becoming so common that actually right whales have been suffering from it now. But I'm really close to end. But this is a beautiful photo of what we used to call partial albinos. They are not albinos, but partial albino calf breaching near the boat. But I wanted to finish not with dead animals and with all these questions about why they are dying or why they are not growing as fast as they used, with a couple of things about ecotourism at Peninsula Valdez. Peninsula Valdez is one of the main centers of the whale watching industry in the world. The activity, boat-based activity or boat-based whale watching, started informally in 1971 with a few people taking friends on their boats. At the same time that the right whale program started in 1971, so it's not all coincidence. They were all good friends, everybody at that time that they were interested in whales. But nowadays, and look at this number, around 200,000 people a year participate in this activity. At Peninsula Valdez alone, it's a huge industry, which should be done well and with being careful of the animals. But fortunately, in Argentina, or at least in Peninsula Valdez, the activity is well regulated. Only 6 companies have permits. Those companies only have 2 boats. They are not allowed to have more than those 2 boats in the water. They are not allowed to have more than a boat with a whale or a pair of whales. They are not allowed to approach a mother and a calf early in the season when the babies are newly born. If later in the season they approach a mother and a calf, they have to leave after so many minutes. It's a very well regulated activity. The permits, the laws and the protocols were developed, and some of them were adjusted to the local conditions, basically to the particular species and the particular set of animals that you have there. And all that is done with the whale and with the well-being of the whales and the ecosystem as their center. I'm actually an advocate of boat-based whale watching because in other parts of the world it's the only way to see these magnificent animals, but it has to be done carefully and with a lot of respect. But Peninsula Valdez has something else. It has many other things, but something else that you won't find any place in the world. Peninsula Valdez is unique. It allows you to have endless walks on the beach accompanied by whales. It allows you to have experiences unique. You could actually do whale watching just sitting, drinking mate or drinking your favorite drink and sharing that with your family and friends. And you don't have to pay a dime to get on the boat. You don't have to go and bother the animals if you think their boats are bothering them. You can just be on the shore and see them and spend some really good time with these animals and see how close. Look at this picture. It's just I look at this image and a few other ones that I have like that, and it's just unbelievable that you could get that close to a 50-ton animal and share a moment with them. And with that, I'm going to finish the talk. I know that there are lots of things that could be said about our research at Peninsula Valdez. We could actually give a lecture. Each of the slides that I show about our research could be turned into an entire lecture because it's a lot of people working on it, and it takes a long time to do research on these animals. But I want to thank, first of all, Vicky and John, that I don't know if they are in the audience, but I hope they are. They're great friends, and the Right Whale program wouldn't be what it is now without them. I want to thank all the institutions that I belong to. The logos are here, and all the ICB or Instituto de Conservación de Ballenas volunteers that do a fantastic job. And if you want to learn more in Spanish, you can check out that website up there, and you learn a lot more about our research and conservation initiatives in Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciano. Wonderful. I always learn so much when I get to listen to you talk about the southern right whales, which I've been doing now, I realized, for about 20 years. So I know it's embarrassing to say how fast time's gone or how old we are. I'm not sure what to say. There are a couple questions from the attendees, and we can jump to those, but I would just be curious. One thing that's always struck me from the first time I went to the Peninsula Valdez in 1992 to all of the other times I've been there is these southern right whales, and this is a very non-scientific question, despite the fact that I'm also a scientist. They seem like they're really curious and want to be near humans. So many times we're out on the whaling boat and the driver, will cut the engine and the whales approach us. What do you think's going on? Like, have you had experiences where you think they're trying to figure you out as much as you're trying to figure them out?
Yes, there are a few things going on there. In those events, and that a whale will approach a boat. Definitely, they are very curious, particularly if there are young animals or juveniles or part of mating group. If it is a mother and a calf, usually the mother will try to avoid the boat, especially during the first weeks when the baby is born. Later in the season, the mothers will let the babies play a little more and approach the boat more, but definitely they are very curious. The other thing that goes on there in whale watching trips, it's a trick that the whale watching captains do, which is they turn off their engines, but they let their boat drift with the current. And it seems like the whale is approaching you, but it's the boat approaching the animals. It's what they do. But yes, the whales, they definitely know that you're there. They will definitely come and look at you and try to see what's going on. This picture actually that you could see here, this is me. And that's a very young female that we had a beautiful encounter in the year 2004 with Mariano, and it was a small mating group, and she was the focal female, and very, very young, very small. But once we got very close to them, she actually left the mating group and came right towards the boat and just wanted to check us out. She didn't care about anything else and came very close, and even she will touch the boat and put her eye out of the water and look at us. So definitely they are very, very curious.
Great. Yeah, exactly. That's been my experience. So I'm going to read a couple questions to you.
Okay.
Jaya who
Hi,
you
Diane.
know, she asks from Ecology and Legacy Minor, is there a connection between length of time spent at Peninsula Valdez, where they are fasting, and successful orca attacks? Thank you, Luciano. It's wonderful to see you.
I don't think there is a connection on that. Successful orca attacks at Peninsula Valdez have not been reported, as far as I know. Successful taken as a baby or an animal being eaten or killed by an orca. There are, of course, attacks and reports, and actually there is a publication about numbers of reports. Can't remember of successful orca attacks, which are very, very few there. So I don't think there is a connection there. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, obviously, even if there are few orca attacks, losing your offspring when you only get to reproduce every 3 years at most is huge, right? So that is enormous loss. Yeah.
Yes.
This is one from Danny, who you also know, Danny Beatty. Do you have any data indicating different whale behavior over time correlated to rising sea level or changing ocean temperatures?
Hi, Danny. You always ask so deep questions. With rising sea levels, no, we don't have any data. With changing ocean temperatures, well, this is what I was saying earlier. We think that that changing ocean temperatures are changing the food that these animals are eating, the abundance of food, and potentially the locations of the places where these animals are eating. So definitely they could be, and we think they are, changing their foraging strategies, at least in the Southern Ocean. Any other type of behavior, I'm not sure there is research that we could say anything about it. So no.
Great. Thanks, Luciano. Okay, the next question is, there are a couple here that I think are related. One is saying, with COVID, is Peninsula Valdez hoping for tourists this summer, which would be our summer, your winter, July. And then the other one that's related says, with lack of tourism, has there been more space or time for scientists to study the whales?
Well, there has not been any space or time because everything was shut down this our winter, your summer, which is right when we should have been studying the animals. No permits were issued, no travel was allowed. So this past year was the first time in 50 years, and it was actually our 50th anniversary. It was the first time that we could not do research, unfortunately. Regarding the other question, hoping for tourists this summer or our winter, yes. At the end of the whale watching season last year, the government of Chubut province opened the whale watching activities to locals. So you could not travel from other provinces, but at least the locals from the cities around the area could go and do whale watching, and the activity resumed at the end of the industry. We're hoping that yes, during this year, we could do research, and there would be tourism going on at Peninsula Valdez. Yes.
Well, we certainly expect to be there in the summer of 2022 and thereafter. And I've been in touch with our colleagues, Botasi, the whale watching, company and whatnot. Here's a question that's very personal to you, Luciano. What got you into research of whales in this particular area of study?
Well, I always wanted to work with whales or dolphins since I was a kid. I wanted to do something about them. I had no idea what. Of course, I wanted to be a vet. That's the only thing that I knew, a profession that would work with animals. And when I was in high school, I got there was a visiting biologist that gave a talk on my high school, and he gave a talk about him spending time in Antarctica and working with seals and sea lions. And that's where I discovered that there was a career called biologist or biology? I have no idea. I'm from a small town where there's no university, so I didn't know that exists. So that was in my second year of high school, second or third year of high school, and then I started exploring. Once I knew that, I started exploring what a biologist would do, and then I decided to study biology. But I went to the University of Buenos Aires, which is not right next to the ocean. It's a huge university. And I didn't give up on the dream of working with whales, but I discovered biology, really discovered what all biology was about. And I was fascinated by many things. But when I was finishing my studies, I think I'm making this story too long, but when I was finishing my studies through a friend, I got in contact with Vicky Roundtree, and they needed a field assistant for one particular field season in the year 2000. They said, we need somebody that knows how to drive a boat and knows how to speak English. I didn't. I lied. My English was really, really bad. I knew how to drive a boat, but my English was really bad. I went there anyway, and I ended up spending almost close to 2 months being a field assistant there. And I didn't speak much. I actually was called the mute because I didn't speak much, but I didn't know much English. So anyway, that's how I got into studying whales. After that, talking to Vicky, we decided that it could be a good idea for me to do a PhD at Utah, and I did, and here I am.
Oh, Luciano, that's such a funny story because it parallels mine. I went to college thinking I was going to med school, and I loved, nature, running around my grandma's farm and looking at animals and seeing baby sheep being born and whatnot. But I had no idea that biology was an actual field. And then when I got to college and there were theories and ideas and people talking about ecology and evolution, it totally blew my mind. And I was taken with that whole idea. But you also make me laugh with, like, when I met you, you didn't speak English.
I didn't. I know. I was applying to the graduate school, and I didn't speak.
I know, and your English is so superb, and I wish my Spanish were as good as your English. But how often we end up in the places we are because we're willing to take a risk and go out on a limb and say, hey, I want to do this, and then somebody says yes to us, and then we go full throttle, on that. But wonderful. So I have another question for you from Vanessa, who you also know. With global warming, then, given your talk, should we predict to see a decrease in food supply?
Hi, Vanessa. In food, you mean food for the whales?
Yeah, I think she means correct. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And we've seen, and the models are predicting that there will be a reduction in krill abundance. And for the people that don't know, krill is a small crustacean. I show an image. I didn't point it out. It's a very small crustacean, but it's the base that supports pretty much the entire food web around Antarctica. Every single animal depends on krill around Antarctica. And I show that the animals the whales have reproductive failures or reductions during low krill years. Other researchers have seen the same with penguins, with seals, with sea lions. It's not just the whales. And definitely we will see reductions in the productivity, not the primary productivity per se, but krill and the food chain will be affected, no doubt about it. And it's already being affected. Yep.
That is, Luciano, the extent of our questions. I will just finish by asking, maybe I think people here would be super interested in hearing a little bit about just the experience of being in Argentina during COVID. Anything you want to share about that in terms of, you spent 10 more years in the United States, so the cultural differences and the political differences and whatnot, and anything you want to point out about what's going on there would be super informative for us.
Well, it's been difficult to say the least. Argentina started a strict quarantined in mid-March last year. Just to have an idea, I started mid-March last year, and I haven't put a step on our work lab or office since. So lots of works have been affected. People have been pretty good at maintaining distance and not traveling much. The strict quarantine was lifted last year prior to the beginning of summer and the summer vacations, because there was a lot of pressure for this ban to be lifted. And we saw an increase on cases after that, of course. But it's been actually difficult. I think the government is trying to, or was trying to do the right thing. It did it very slow, or not in the time that should have been doing. The different lift the quarantine at different times. We are just starting vaccinations in Argentina. We are using the Russian vaccine, which I 100% support for that vaccine. I've read the only study, but I read it. And we are actually vaccinating this week. We are starting to vaccinate people over 70 years of age. People at hospitals, and doctors have been getting the vaccine. Doctors and nurses have been getting the vaccine since late January. So it's going to be a very slow process. The Argentine economy has suffered a lot because of this in all aspects. But I think we're going to have a much better year this year. All the universities in Argentina are going to have their first semester, which is starting right now, with classes online. No classes in the classrooms. However, primary school, middle school, and high school are reopening with classes in their classrooms, with a lot of different, I don't know how to say, impracticables protocols. You cannot follow them, particularly in the public schools, because their public schools are not well funded, and you can't really follow these protocols. But there was a lot of pressure from the opposition, and even people in the government wanted to open the classes, with kids in the schools. So it's happening, but the universities didn't. The universities have more autonomy in their decisions. So none of the national, at least not the national public universities, are opening their classrooms. I think that's smart, for at least 3 or 4 months more.
I agree. And hopefully we'll all get there by June or something. So I just want to thank you, Luciano, so much. And I always learn new things, even though I kind of follow this research, but I always learn new things when I hear you talk. And I'm so much looking forward to bringing a group of students to the peninsula in 2022. And I thank you also for agreeing to be a guest in Dr. Andy Hoffman's classes next week.
I will be there.
We're really looking forward to that. So with that, I will say thank you. And I'm just saying there was one more thing. Everyone's saying thank you. Yes. So everyone's saying thank you. Well, and thank you so much. We'll be in touch, and we will see each other in, I don't know, 12 months at the most.
Well, thank you, Sylvia. It's a pleasure to talk to you and all the people at the university and all the people at the honors college. It's a pleasure to be part of the ecology and legacy part, and to talk to these fantastic students. They are every time that I talk to people in Argentina and I explain the class that we teach and who are the students that come. Every time that I talk to them, in my mind come, their names and our, conversation. And I think these kids are brilliant. And I mean, I'm really proud of being part of it. They're really, really, really brilliant students, and makes me very hopeful for the future, because I was a teaching assistant for so many years and an instructor at the U, and I met many different students in my classes, but never had the chance while I was there to teach, an honors class. And these kids are just brilliant, and I'm hopeful for the future of the US and the world with minds like that. Thank you.
Absolutely. The bar is held high for them.
Yeah.
I agree. And with that, kudos. Thank you so much, Luciano.
Thank
Ciao.
you. Ciao, ciao. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye
Cuídate.
bye.